Hi, it's Marc Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Marc Zicree of Space Command, Star Trek writer Marc Zicree, Twilight Zone companion writer Marc Zicree, tons of other stuff. If you're fans of the Littles, I wrote a lot of those. Many things, Real Ghostbusters, etc. Doesn't matter. What we're going to talk about today is The Handmaid's Tale, and compare it with some of the other science fiction shows that are on or have been on recently, because there's a larger subject to talk about. Now, The Handmaid's Tale, I watched the first episode around when it came out. Then this dark, depressing show. So I held off until I was on a flight back from London to Los Angeles recently. Had some time on my hands, and I watched most of the rest of it except for the last episode. Got back to LA, watched the last episode. So now I've watched the entire first season of Handmaid's Tale, and now they're making a second season. And I also saw a panel with the showrunner and one of the directors and so forth. So I really sort of understand where the show's coming from and what it's up to and all of that. So, and many of you know, of course, that Elizabeth Moss won an Emmy for A Handmaid's Tale. I believe it won Best Series. So it's, it's done really well. And it kind of put Hulu on the map in terms of new drama series. And every network needs a show that puts it on the map to really get going. And for many of the networks, those are science fiction or horror or fantasy shows. X-Files put Fox on the map. Buffy put the WB on the map. Star Trek, the various iterations put the Paramount Network, UPN, on the map, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, you insert your favorite show here, and it'll probably be something that established a network one way or another. So, but let's talk about Handmaid's Tale. It stars Elizabeth Moss, who was terrific in Mad Men, of course, very talented actress. And it also has Joseph Fiennes, who's the brother of Ray Fiennes, and really before this, probably his biggest role would have been as Shakespeare in Love. Very good actor, very a capable actor, playing either a bad guy or a good guy. Here he plays a bad guy. And there are many things to admire about the show, but it's almost like this is like a show you're supposed to watch because it's good for you, and it's just really depressing and hard to take. And I won't say it revels in sadism, but it certainly doesn't shy away from sadism. And again, like with comedy, where what you find funny or what you find not funny is along a spectrum depending on who you are, that's true also with violence and what you can take and what you prefer not to watch. So one thing that was very interesting about the aesthetic of Handmaid's Tale is they said they would only do atrocities against women if there was somewhere in the world where those atrocities are being done now. So women aren't allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia. There's a female circumcision at various places, particularly in Africa. There's, women aren't allowed to go out in public alone, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's many prohibitions against women in different parts of the world. And of course, still there's a fight even in this country for the equal rights of women and equal pay for women. And the fight goes on. And again, there's the alt-right, and because of Trump and the alt-right and all of this stuff, the resurgence of racism and sexism and homophobia and all of these things, The Handmaid's Tale ended up being much more current than it initially intended to be. And that's all to the good. You now have women coming out against abusers, and again, we can talk about that another time, because, again, there's a spectrum along those lines too. And but we won't get into that in detail now. What we're going to talk about is Handmaid's Tale and compare it with shows like Star Trek Discovery, the Orville Westworld, and so forth. And even Space Command, perhaps, who knows. So it's a well-produced show. Interestingly enough, it's not a hugely expensive show, unlike something like Game of Thrones, which is over $15 million per episode now. And Star Trek Discovery is up around $8 to $10 million. Handmaid's Tale is made for less than that. And it's well designed. It looks good. It knows what it's about. It definitely knows what it's doing. And the directors are very talented. The writers are very talented. It's adapting. The first season adapts Margaret Atwood's novel, dystopic science fiction novel from decades ago. And an interesting thing about that is that one of the things The Handmaid's Tale has done is previously, if a book, particularly a science fiction novel, was adapted into a movie that bombed, that would pretty much end its chances for being remade or made as a TV series. It would become very challenging, because they would look at the movie and say, well, clearly this didn't adapt. It doesn't have a successful track record. That would kill it in terms of adaptation. But now, because Handmaid's Tale was made into a movie that tanked, a few years ago, and now is a successful series. Now they're going back to all these books that were unsuccessful movies or unsuccessful TV shows, but successful books, and they're re-examining that. And I think again that's great because it allows good source material. And again, the studio and the network philosophy is they like taking things that have been successful in other media, because then if it tanks, the executive generally doesn't lose his or her job, because they can say, well, it was a bestseller, well, it was a successful movie, whatever. And successful graphic novel, they like it to be a pre-existing property that's got a successful track record. So Handmaid's Tale debuted on Hulu. The first season covers the novel. Second season, interestingly enough, they're going into basically uncharted territory. So they went back to Margaret Atwood. She apparently had some notes for a novella, or had written a novella that continued the story. So they're going to be deriving material from that, from other places. And but it's a very, very worthwhile show, and it has Elizabeth Moss before she's captured and forced to be part of this weird, dystopic, anti-feminist world in the United States. It's an interracial marriage, which is fine unless you're some kind of alt-right crazy nutcase, and I'm sure the trolls will come out of the woodwork. Just let me say it here. I'm in favor of diversity. I'm in favor of showing a world in our work that reflects the world we live in. And for me, I live in a world with people of other religions, people of other sexual orientations, transgender, gay. I like that. I'm glad there's gay marriage that's legalized. I'm glad that transgender people are getting protections, and I want them to have more protections. I want women to draw equal pay and have equal opportunities. I'm not threatened by any of that. I'm secure in my manhood and my creative body of work. So I do not see people as a threat if they're different from me. I think if we come with love, if we come with mutual supportiveness, we create a world that's worth living in. And compassion is vital. And if you've been watching Mr. Sci-Fi, you know where I stand. So, Handmaid's Tale, hard show to watch. I'm glad I watched it. I'm glad I watched all 10 episodes. I'm not eager to flock to the next season, but again, I'm glad it exists. I think everyone working on it is working on it for the right reasons. I think they're trying to create something that spurs discussion and perhaps opens some doors and opens some possibilities. But for myself, let's talk about there's a spectrum of entertainment, and we watch TV, I think, and movies usually to be entertained, sometimes to be informed, but often primarily you've worked your day, you've spent your day at work, or you're on the weekend. You want to kick back and see something entertaining, something fun, and not something that's like, here, this is good for you, watch 10 hours of this. So for me, The Handmaid's Tale is not something that I just flock to. I was on an airplane, I could watch it, but for me, a show like Westworld is my cup of tea because it surprises me. I thought it was great. I thought it had a really nice balance of action and characterization and ideas. I thought the cast was terrific with Anthony Hopkins and Ed Harris. Ed Harris is one of my favorite actors. I love him in The Abyss, by the way, which is a greatly underrated movie. And watch the director's cut. I think you'll really like that film. It's got some great stuff in it. And Evan Rachel Wood is great. Tandy Newton is great. I think it's beautifully realized, beautifully shot. Art direction's terrific. Ideas are great. God knows what they're going to do for the second season. I mean, I've seen the trailer for it. It's going to open things up. We'll see. And they intend a 5-season arc, so more power to them. If they can sustain that, that's great. That's terrific. It's a really cool idea. And of course, with Space Command, I'm dealing with synthetic humans as well as a lot of other things, alien life, etc. But I'm exploring that terrain too of science fiction is often about how we oppress other people one way or another, whether it's Bright dealing with orcs as a surrogate for racial tensions, or Handmaid's Tale dealing with feminism, or Space Command dealing with synthetic humans who are a slave culture, or Blade Runner 2049 doing the same thing as that. We're all trying to comment on the world if we're doing our job right, and process it through the lens of science fiction and fantasy, which allows you to take a step back and look at it from a different angle and perhaps be enlightened, perhaps change your point of view, or at least feel heartened by possibility and creating a future that's worth creating. Dystopia gives us a vision on a world we can avoid, and of course something like Star Trek, when done well, shows us a world we can create, and many people have created it. We have cell phones now. We have many things that science fiction writers predicted, and in predicting them helped to create them, and showing them to a larger audience helped to create them. So So whether so the Orville, Star Trek Discovery, I basically see it as a spectrum. The Orville, if you want your science fiction, still commenting on the world, but funnier, lighter, with more likable characters. The Orville is for you. If you like a darker kind of science fiction, Star Trek Discovery might be for you. If you like something a little edgier, if you like just good science fiction that's exciting and you don't know where it's going, Westworld is my cup of tea, as I said. And if you want something very dark and challenging, then Handmaid's Tale. And so again, and by the way, the idea of viewing parties is really fun. I mean, where you get your friends together and you watch a show. There's something to be said for that. And have a barbecue, talk about, or if it's winter and you're freezing your ass off, then do something inside. But it doesn't just have to be us watching stuff alone and then getting onto webisodes or whatever and commenting on them. Watch stuff with your friends, watch stuff with your kids, watch stuff with your family, and talk about it, because that's the whole point of all of this. And then say, well, what can I actually do about this? What does it make me want to do in the real world? Because God knows there's a lot for all of us to do in the real world to make a better future, to make a better present. And so I think one of the reasons you're getting science fiction that's commenting on so many things now is because the world is creating a lot of challenges, and the world can force us apart, can put us in our own little enclaves where we're just hearing an echo chamber of what we believe. But I think the more we're listening to other points of view, and even the alt-right, as disturbing as that is, it sparks protest, it sparks commentary, it sparks action against evil. I think anytime anyone's being put down, anyone is being repressed and put in a box and stereotyped, any of that, and conservatives feel stereotyped too, and I think there's a validity to that. I mean, certainly the little guy has been pissed on or ill-treated, I mean, by the wealthy, by the powers that be. I think people want a better life for their kids, want a better life for their families, for their future. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you allow other people their dreams too. So, and a lot of conservatives have very good hearts. They're very good neighbors and friends. And so again, I'm not just a proponent of liberals and waving that flag. That's too limiting too. So again, Handmaid's Tale, back to Handmaid's Tale. It's worth checking out. It's worth watching. And I 3 cheers for Hulu in greenlighting it. There's an amazing amount of science fiction being done now that's terrific. That's really phenomenal, and I applaud that. And I applaud the fact that the show doesn't have to get an audience of 15 or 20 million, or back in Twilight Zone's day, they would get 30 or 40 million as an audience. Now you can have a very small audience, and still have a viable show. So that's it for now. We'll be doing more Mr. Sci-Fi videos ongoingly. I post about once a week, and so subscribe to Mr. Sci-Fi. Check it out. If you haven't, check out the other videos, and we'll talk to you all very, very soon. And again, Space Command, I mentioned Space Command. You can check that out on Mr. Sci-Fi, or you can go to spacecommandseries.com and see what we're doing. You can pledge to it on Patreon. We're pitching it as a show now. We're in post. We just had a very successful crowdfunding campaign. I'm writing the entire 12 hours now of the first season, and I've written 8 hours, rewriting some of that, and then plunging forward. It's actually, gosh, may even be 14 hours. I have to go check. There's a prequel I'm writing as well. So, and there's a novel that's been written. So many more adventures in 2018, much more to come. Thanks very much for watching this, and we'll talk again real soon. Bye-bye, guys.